Oh, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching this on. They will appear here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And hello to Rev Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Rev Michael. And I hope you're having a lovely Monday. Here in Danville, we have a little bit of snow falling, but it doesn't seem to be collecting on the ground. But you can see it coming down in the air, which is interesting and certainly in season and in keeping with my topic for today. And hello to Tom in the chat room. It's good to see you, Tom. I thought today I would talk about the figure commonly called Santa and other Yuletide tropes, other Yuletide traditions, in and amongst other conversation that may occur. And Santa is a figure very widely venerated um, and often conflated with the Christian figure of Saint Nicholas. And hello to Renee in the chat room. And this is certainly an old conflation, but it's certainly not an origin, although it is the origin of the common English name Santa Claus. But if we look at the whole of European tradition, we'll notice this exact same figure all the way from the British Isles into Eastern Russia under a variety of different names, but mostly very similar appearance and custom. Usually, in the larger area where it's found, he's called Father Frost. You'll also find him as Father Winter, and in some later times, Father Christmas. And of course, he was conflated intentionally with the figure of St. Nicholas, who historically really doesn't have anything to do with him and isn't really a good fit. And if you want to consider a little bit more about that, if you look to the area where St. Nicholas actually comes from, you'll find that the midwinter gift giver there has been conflated with St. Basil instead, showing that that conflation is relatively recent, but that there was a midwinter gift giver is attested by the fact that there still is one. The figure of Santa has a great deal to do, again, with Father Frost, and you'll find Father Frost generally portrayed as a single individual living in a northern area who comes more or less at the solstice to give gifts. You will also find connections to deities such as Odin. And a lot of people will say that Santa is a renamed Odin. And while there's truth in that, it's not that simple. There are more figures that contribute to it than just Odin, because the Roman Saturn is part of it too. The Saturn who ruled over Saturnalia is part of the modern Santa figure as well. And these and other ancient deities have contributed their aspect to this surviving memory in general culture, and most people have no idea the diverse origins of this character, even though they continue to celebrate it. In fact, many of them are convinced of ideas such as it was only invented by Coca-Cola to sell soft drinks in the 1940s, which is absolutely not true. Although certain aspects of contemporary appearance were reshaped at that time due to those advertisements, but the figure was well established. And hello to Ravenwolf in the chat room. So these are some of the origins of the midwinter gift giver figure. If you look at the various versions of it, not all of the aspects that we think of in the English-speaking world, or at least in the North American world, are necessarily still associated with it or necessarily were. And that has to do, again, with the diverse origins of the figure. One of the most interesting things that is pretty universal, and yet nobody ever seems to talk about it or think much about it, is the connection with elves. And one of the reasons for the connection with elves is that often this figure in Certain parts of northwestern Europe was depicted as being an elf. Um, and in some places, this elf was thought of as particular to um, a particular homestead rather than a single one who went everywhere and represented the ancestors of that homestead. And the aspect of Santa as an ancestral figure, the aspect of Santa as a Lord of the Dead, is often not discussed either because most people have forgotten that the midwinter holiday was not unlike the Halloween holiday, heavily devoted to the dead and stories of ghosts and so forth, up until really quite recently. As late as the 30s and 40s, you would still find this in some parts of the English speaking world, at least. And that aspect um, of ancestral veneration at this time had been very, very important. It's one of the reasons why you have three ghosts in the middle of the Christmas Carol. They were not at all out of place in that era, but they've tended to be forgotten about largely today in other contexts. But at that time, the association of ghosts and the winter solstice um, was rather strong. And yesterday, last evening, we did an online Yule ritual focusing on the idea um, of the spirits of solstice, past, present, and future. I thought it was a lovely ritual. Um, Turned out better than I had actually thought it would go. So if you haven't seen that already, I recommend it. But it used this idea as both a narrative and an active power to focus on the past, the present, and the future, and how these interact in manifesting the things that you want in life and releasing the things that you want to release. And that was quite a lovely ritual, and I was joined for that by Reverend Mary Hawk and Reverend Brian Ellicott, and we had a lovely time. Earlier in the day, here in Vermilion County, we did a real-time ritual, and that was quite lovely as well. I posted a number of photos from that event, but it was nice to see so many people, even though it was rather cold, being Central Illinois. Um, Having lived in Florida so long, I'm perhaps a little more aware of the cold this year than when I previously lived here. But it was a lovely ritual and a good time spent with many friends. And you can see photos of that on my page. We Oh, and Renee says the ritual was beautiful last night. Thank you, Renee. Um, it it's interesting because originally there were supposed to be 5 people taking part in that ceremony, um, and for various reasons, including physical illness, it turned out just to be 3 of us. But I think the 3 worked out just perfectly. Um, it is interesting sometimes when spirit takes a hand to decide who is going to be there and who is not. Um, it often works out in ways that you had not considered. I would not have thought we could rearrange that ritual for just 3 people and have it turn out so well. But I found that we did. And, historically, I've had that experience before where we have um, a large ritual, but a small number of people. And I've experienced that in our Corellian lustrations. When we did lustration in the United Kingdom, we had, um, I want to say, just 9 ritual participants, and had to take that very large ritual and arrange for just 9 people to do it, and it came out beautifully. In the Fellowship of Isis, I've seen this happen also. If you're not familiar with the Fellowship of Isis, their ritual liturgy consists of mystery plays, which often have quite large numbers of characters, on the premise that you're going to have a large group of people present. But that isn't always what actually happens. Um, but even when you have to double up the parts, they still come out very nicely. And this is one of the things about doing ritual, particularly when the kind of ritual that you're doing involves um, a liturgical play as part of it. The way that it takes shape is always a little different. And sometimes it will teach you things that you did not originally see in the intention. It's very interesting, I think. And I find I've been doing public ritual now 40 years, a long, long time, and well, more than 40 years. Um, Group ritual, certainly more than 40 years. But I've been leading public rituals for about 40 years, a little bit more. And it is quite an experience, and I highly recommend it for people. Um, Whether we're talking about online or in person, it is always a situation where there are going to be elements you cannot control. And for some people, that's just a stress that they find very hard to deal with. But the reality is that it's an education that's highly valuable. When you're dealing with elements that are beyond your control, then you find out what you actually know and whether you're able to roll with the punches, whether you're able to rearrange your plan and still have a successful outcome. And I've been in situations. I'm thinking of some of the New Witches' balls back in the 1990s, where the person who was supposed to do the ritual got stuck in traffic and couldn't show up, and other people had to be drafted pretty much on the spot, and we still had a lovely ritual. And that really is the mark of whether you know what you're doing. If you can fill in at that last moment and still pull it all together. And the way you learn that is by doing. The way you learn it is by encountering those unexpected circumstances and not letting them stop you, not letting them hold you back. And I'm a great believer in not letting the unexpected hold you back. And hello to Jasmine in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jasmine. I do love seeing the people when they say hello. I love seeing everyone, and I love the fact that we have people all over the world. Um, and that has been for me one of the high points of this program. But we were talking about the figure of Santa, um, a figure that I'm increasingly resembling as I get older. And and Jasmine says, "I hope you're well." But yes, thank you. I am overall. I mean, I'm slower than I used to be. I don't imagine that's going to change because as we get older, that's what happens. But I'm still going, and I'm going stronger than I was. It's been a year. Well, it's been a year of adjustments, physically and otherwise. And I'm taking more medicine now than I've ever taken at any one time. But I also am finding it effective, and so I'm happy that I have it. And Jasmine has said that Santa is an emoji I can't quite make out, but I'm going to assume that that it's an interesting comment. But Santa again is a reflex of very ancient deities, and if you look at the wide range in which this figure appears by that or other names, you can see the wide range of um, of difference in customs and also the similarities. Um, Various versions of Dead Morosh or Father Frost are the most common name for this figure in Eastern Europe. And it's absolutely there and has been going all the way back to pagan antiquity and has been recorded accordingly. Hello to Jason in the chat room. And it's pretty much exactly the same, minus a few aspects of accoutrement, as the Western European figure often called Saint Nicholas or Father Winter. And the the general appearance of this figure doesn't change a great deal. It's an older man with a white beard. Um, Father Frost is usually dressed in gray or blue. Um, We were talking earlier about Coca-Cola and how that's caused the Western figure to commonly be dressed in red, although that might go back a little farther than that. But um, the figure itself is pretty universal. Now, there are also some other um, figures associated with midwinter gift giving, such as La Befana in Italy, who is the midwinter witch, um, who is generally thought to be a survival um, of, I believe originally the Etruscan goddess, certainly later the Roman goddess Strix, who is a goddess of fate and associated particularly with the new year. And the midwinter witch, La Befana, is a figure who flies through the air on her broomstick, giving out gifts to children in the same way that Santa Claus and his sled fly around. And she is another midwinter gift giver. We also have the figure of Snegurushka, the snow maiden, who shows up a lot in Eastern Europe. But she's quite a popular modern figure. Snegurushka appears to have originated, I believe, in the 19th century as the result of a literary work who became very popular. But she's often shown now as a companion to Jed Morosh. Um, and then you also have things like Krampus, who is a figure that associates with the midwinter gift giver in parts of Central Europe. And the Krampus figure is basically a mixture of several animals in a humanoid form with prominent horns and a protruding tongue, who's become very popular in recent years beyond his original places of origin. But he's only one of a number of similar figures that you see around the winter solstice in Central Europe. I remember the Silvesterklausen, who all look basically like Krampus, but represent the spirits of nature at this time of year. And it speaks to the fact that historically, and hello to Tina in the chat room, historically, the midwinter solstice was in many cases a New Year's ceremony, and like most New Year's ceremonies, it included an inversion of what was considered normal. Those figures who were kind of kept at the edge of society were brought into the center. Social order was reversed for the occasion. Um, and you see things like the Festival of Misrule, which appeared in much of Western Europe, which is clearly a continuation of Saturnalia, which had this aspect as well, but you see it far beyond just Saturnalia. We don't really see that part very often in modern practice, but I don't know that that's for the better. It gave a time for people to transgress beyond their normal social role and to experience other roles. And I think that that played an important role in society. One of the things that was often common, depending on where you're looking, in the idea of the Feast of Misrule, was that children would be put in adult positions for the day, which in a way gave them a taste of what might wait for them in later life. I think that was a very interesting custom. And there are very many interesting customs around midwinter. As I was saying earlier, this used to be a festival heavily associated with death and the afterlife. And I would say to you that Father Frost, Father Winter, Santa Claus, um, all of those figures, and La Befana, all of them are fairly obviously associated with the idea of the ruler of the spirit world. And you'll find other examples of figures associated with solstice, winter solstice, who are in that position. You'll find references to the Feast of the Undead, because at one time that was an important part of this ceremony. And Saturn, who of course ruled over Saturnalia, was in at least one form a ruler of the dead. He was in Rome, as opposed to Kronos in Greece, who was looked at a little differently. But in Rome, Saturn was thought of as the great ancestor. and the ruler of the land of the dead in certain aspects. And his festival had a lot to do with that concept. And Roman religion, like all religion, had heterodox origins. Everyone wants to think and try very hard to argue that all movements come from a single point and spread out, but that's almost never really the case. What happens most commonly is that many different things come together to form a new path, which then will later split into other new paths. And if you look at Roman religion or Egyptian religion or any ancient religion, you'll see that there are many different strains of thought all coexisting at once, and that it's very difficult to make blanket statements about them for that reason. One of the reasons that people today have a different idea is that the Judeo-Christian religions um, have the idea that everything must be in a certain uniform way, but the pagan religions mostly did not. And they were free to adapt many different ideas. So if you were in the Roman Empire, for example, what you found spiritually in Rome could be very different from what you would find um, in northern Italy or southern Italy. You would find a number of differences, and even more if you went farther out into the empire. Religion was a highly local and often highly personal thing. One of the most interesting quotes from ancient Rome comes, I believe, from Cicero, who made a comment that he honored the gods but did not believe in them. And a lot of people have used that to imply that Cicero is an atheist, but actually he was a spiritualist, and he was very big um, in working with the spirits of the dead, especially his daughter, who had died young and was very, very close to him. And it speaks to how individual religious expression was. And I think this is something that so many modern forces try to fight against, but we actually should look at as being one of our great strengths. I would say to you that even though many of us may come together in certain traditions, our individual paths are always individual. Our exact understandings will always be individual. And I think that's good. I think it's part of nature. And I don't really think it can be otherwise. Um, and I think that diversity is a great source of strength. I saw someone on their Facebook page the other day um, ask the question, what do you value about diversity, or something to that effect? And my answer to that is I'm a great believer in the idea that diversity is what gives us strength. I am a firm rejecter of the idea of purity. And I think if you look historically, you'll find the only that ideas of pure race or pure culture or pure religion are almost always destructive and do nothing but narrow people's point of view. Whereas a more open point of view brings in new skills, new ideas, and new abilities, and invariably creates um, a stronger present. So I'm a great believer in the idea of diversity. And um, I think that as we look at things like the Santa figure, but also all of our religious figures and customs, we will always find diversity in their origins and current expressions. And if we don't, maybe we need to bring more in. I know it's very popular the last few years for everyone to want to make sure the carrots never touch the peas. Um, but peas alone do not make for a good diet, neither do carrots alone. And in the end, the food all goes to the same place anyway. So I am not a believer in in the idea of religious or other purity. I think that diversity and integration are vitally important to having a healthy understanding of anything. Um, and that without them, your understanding is going to be limited and probably not very healthy. And in fact, if you look at those who emphasize religious purity, racial purity, cultural purity, you'll find they're always trying to kill everyone who disagrees with them, which I think shows a very unhealthy point of view. Um, and it's very hard for them. The point of view that they're following makes it impossible to just agree to disagree with people, and that never leads to a good place. In life, there are always going to be people who don't agree with us. There are always going to be people who have other points of view, and always the most profitable way to deal with it, when possible, is to agree to disagree and still live in peace together. Now, sometimes that second part, being able to live in peace together, isn't always possible. Usually, because those who believe in things like religious and racial purity refuse to, and then you have to take a stand. Um, but when people can agree to disagree, I think it's always better. So I see that we're coming down toward the end of our half hour. I hope that you've been enjoying this conversation. I've been enjoying it. And um, for me, the figure of Father Winter or Santa Claus or Father Frost or whatever you want to call it, and other variations such as La Befana, is a figure that I'm very fond of. And to me, it represents the spirit of the season, the spirit of the winter, the deity of the afterlife. And if you look at deities of the afterlife, that they're very often associated um, with the concept of wealth and prosperity. So the idea that this figure gives gifts at the winter solstice um, also connects it to the idea of the afterlife. And if you look at the figure of Cernunnos, for example, um, in the Celtic culture, you'll see many of the same tropes around this figure. Um, and I would assume that it was, and generally assume that it was, the same basic figure. And you find it throughout um, many different spiritualities. So I think that it's very good for us to continue to employ this figure in our modern celebrations. I certainly don't think we're borrowing it from anyone, because we've had it all along. And at the festival yesterday, one of the interesting things was a 6 foot tall Santa Claus in one of the corners. And I thought that was very appropriate to a Yule ceremony. And it is, um, I think, a nice little piece of holiday cheer. And Tina says, always a pleasure. Blessed be and have a blessed Yule. Thank you. And you as well, Tina, and all of you. I hope everyone has a wonderful Yule and a wonderful Yule season. And I see at this point that we have used our time, so I'm going to say goodbye for now. And I will see you again soon. I hope the rest of your day is beautiful. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we ask you to help us to keep our minds and our spirits open, to help us to find joy everywhere that is present in life, and to help us to make our lives joyous, and therefore also help to make other people's lives joyous. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you soon.